A millionaire found a small beggar girl sleeping in his garden and took her home. When he arrived from work, he started crying with what the girl did to his disabled wife. The crystal chandelier cast elegant shadows across the Anderson family's dining room as they gathered for what should have been a routine family dinner. Thomas Anderson watched his brother Michael's calculated movements as he arranged the plates with unusual precision, an odd glint in his eyes that Thomas couldn't quite decipher. Sarah, the young girl Thomas had taken in from the streets, sat quietly at the far end of the table, her thin frame almost disappearing into the ornate chair. Her presence had sparked intense family controversy, especially with Emily, Thomas's wife, who watched the scene unfold from her wheelchair with barely concealed disdain. "I hope everyone enjoys this special dinner," Michael announced, his voice carrying an unsettling undertone as he placed the final plate. "I've taken particular care with the arrangements tonight." The tension in the room was palpable as family members exchanged guarded glances. They had gathered to discuss Sarah's future, but no one could have predicted how the evening would unfold. As the first course was served, Michael's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine glass. His eyes fixed on Sarah's plate, then darted away quickly. Thomas noticed the strange behavior but attributed it to the evening's stress. Suddenly, Michael's face contorted in pain. His fork clattered against fine china as he clutched his stomach. Something's wrong," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah, who had just raised her fork to her lips, froze at the sight. Thomas leapt from his chair, rushing to his brother's side. "Michael, what's happening?" Through clenched teeth, Michael's eyes locked onto Sarah's untouched plate, horror dawning on his face. No, it wasn't supposed to be like this," he choked out. Emily wheeled herself forward, her face pale with shock. "Michael, what have you done?" In that moment, Michael's words sent ice through Thomas's veins. It was meant for her. The room erupted into chaos. Sarah sat paralyzed, the revelation of the attempted murder striking her like a physical blow. Thomas held his dying brother, torn between horror at the attempt on Sarah's life and desperation to save Michael. Emily watched the scene unfold, her carefully maintained world crumbling around her as family secrets threatened to surface. In those few devastating moments, the facade of the perfect Anderson family shattered, revealing the dark undercurrents that had been churning beneath their polished surface all along. This dinner would mark the beginning of a story that would test the bounds of family loyalty, challenge the meaning of love, and force each person in that room to confront their deepest truths and prejudices. If this gripping opening has stirred your emotions, join us on a journey through love, betrayal, and redemption. Subscribe now to unlock more powerful stories that will touch your heart and challenge your perspective on family, justice, and unconditional love. Thomas Anderson stood at the window of his study, his reflection in the glass revealing a man in his early 40s with distinguished grey temples and kind eyes that carried the weight of unspoken burdens. As CEO of Anderson Enterprises, he had built his fortune through determination and an unwavering moral compass, traits that often put him at odds with his family's more traditional values. Born into privilege but raised with a strong sense of social responsibility by his late mother, Thomas had always felt like an outsider in his own social circle. While his peers focused on accumulating wealth, he secretly funded homeless shelters and education programs for underprivileged children. His marriage to Emily, once a union of genuine love, had gradually transformed into a carefully maintained facade after an accident left her unable to walk. The accident haunted Thomas daily. He had been driving that rainy night, slightly intoxicated after a charity gala. Though Emily survived, their relationship never fully recovered. She retreated into a world of social appearances and rigid expectations, while Thomas threw himself into his philanthropic work, seeking redemption through helping others. His brother Michael, the family's legal counsel, often criticized Thomas's bleeding heart tendencies. "Your kindness will be your downfall," Michael would warn, but Thomas couldn't ignore the voice of conscience his mother had instilled in him. The vast Anderson mansion, with its marble floors and priceless artworks, felt increasingly empty to Thomas, who longed for genuine human connection. Despite his wealth and success, Thomas struggled with deep-seated guilt, not just from Emily's accident, but from his growing awareness of the disparity between his privileged life and the suffering he witnessed in the city's forgotten corners. He kept a small, worn photo in his desk drawer, his mother volunteering at a soup kitchen, her smile radiant as she served others. It was her legacy that drove him to question the values of his social class. His marriage to Emily had become a delicate dance of obligations and unspoken resentments. They maintained appearances at social functions, but their private moments were filled with heavy silences. Emily's accident had changed her fundamentally. The warm, compassionate woman he'd fallen in love with had been replaced by someone whose primary concern was maintaining their social standing at any cost. Thomas knew his family disapproved of his charitable work, seeing it as a potential threat to their reputation. The Andersons had always operated on the principle that privilege must be protected, not shared. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his wealth carried a responsibility to help others, a conviction that would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. Each morning, as he drove to work in his luxury car, Thomas would take detours through the city's poorest neighborhoods, his heart heavy with the contrast between his life and theirs. He had recently begun considering more direct ways to help, despite knowing it would create tension with his family. The Anderson name carried weight in their social circles, and any deviation from expected behavior was met with swift criticism. His study had become his sanctuary, filled with books on social justice and philanthropy that he kept hidden from Emily's disapproving eyes. It was here that he planned his charitable initiatives, carefully balancing his desire to help with the need to maintain family harmony. The portrait of his mother hung on the wall, her gentle eyes seeming to approve of his secret missions of mercy. Little did Thomas know that his comfortable yet conflicted life was about to be upended by a chance encounter that would force him to choose between family loyalty and moral conviction. The arrival of a young girl sleeping in his garden would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, love, and the true meaning of wealth. The scene was set for a story that would test not only Thomas's principles but the very foundations of the Anderson family's carefully constructed world. The question wasn't just whether he would choose to help one homeless girl, but whether he could maintain his humanity in a world that often confused wealth with worth. 20 years ago, Emily Bennett was a young woman from a middle-class family who dared to dream beyond her station. Her beauty and intelligence caught the eye of James Miller, a struggling artist whose passion for life matched her own. Their whirlwind romance resulted in a child, Sarah, born when Emily was barely 20. But dreams of love proved insufficient against the harsh realities of poverty. When Emily met Thomas Anderson at a gallery opening where she worked, she saw a chance at the life she'd always wanted. James's increasing financial struggles and her own ambitions created a perfect storm of opportunity and desperation. The decision to leave her daughter with James was made in the dead of night, tears streaming down her face as she packed her bags, convinced she was doing what was best for everyone. Thomas never knew about Sarah. Emily crafted a new identity, burying her past beneath layers of carefully constructed sophistication. She learned to navigate high society with practiced ease, transforming herself into the perfect socialite wife. The guilt of abandoning Sarah was locked away in a corner of her heart, though it emerged in nightmares that she blamed on prescription medications. Years passed, and Emily's carefully constructed world seemed perfect until the accident. The wheelchair became both a prison and a reminder of her vulnerability. She clung to social status more fiercely than ever, seeing it as her only remaining source of power. What no one knew was that she had secretly hired private investigators to find Sarah and James, only to discover that James had died of untreated cancer, and Sarah had disappeared into the foster care system. This knowledge tormented Emily, manifesting in bitter outbursts, and an obsession with maintaining control over her environment, her wheelchair became a throne from which she issued commands, her sharp tongue a weapon to keep others at a distance. Yet in private moments she would wheel herself to the window, watching street children pass by, wondering if any might be her Sarah. The accident that confined her to the wheelchair didn't just break her body, it shattered her illusion of invulnerability. The same determination that had once driven her to abandon her child now fueled her need to protect her position in society. Every charity event she attended was torture, each child's face a reminder of her greatest sin. Emily's relationship with Thomas became increasingly strained, not just because of the accident, but because his charitable impulses threatened to unravel the protective cocoon she had built around herself. His kindness toward the less fortunate felt like a personal attack, as if each act of generosity was an accusation against her past choices. She maintained a secret box in her dresser drawer, containing a single photograph of baby Sarah and a small hospital bracelet. On nights when the guilt became unbearable, she would hold these items, allowing herself brief moments of raw emotion before rebuilding her walls of indifference. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on Emily. She had abandoned her daughter in pursuit of a better life, only to end up physically imprisoned in a mansion filled with emotional ghosts. She fought against Thomas's charitable tendencies not out of genuine disdain for the poor, but from a desperate fear that her past would catch up with her. Little did she know that fate had a cruel sense of humor. The arrival of a young homeless girl in their garden would soon force Emily to confront the consequences of her choices in ways she never imagined. The carefully constructed facade of Emily Anderson was about to crack, revealing the broken dreams and desperate choices of Emily Bennett underneath. Sarah Miller learned to disappear long before she became homeless. After her father's death from cancerous slow, painful decline that their poverty had only accelerated, the 14-year-old found herself shuttled between foster homes, each more indifferent than the last. She carried only two possessions of value: her father's worn sketchbook and a fading memory of a mother who had vanished into the night. The streets of the city became her education. She learned which restaurants would give away food at closing time, which doorways offered shelter from rain, and which people to avoid. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her nearly invisible to passers-by, a skill she had perfected through necessity. The city's wealthy residents would avert their eyes as she passed, treating her existence as an uncomfortable reminder of life's inequalities. Hunger was her constant companion, a gnawing presence that made every day a battle for survival. She would often stand outside bakeries, inhaling the scent of fresh bread, remembering how her father used to sketch while she did homework at their small kitchen table. His final words haunted her: "Your mother had her reasons, Sarah. Don't let bitterness steal your kindness." During the day, she would seek warmth in public libraries, losing herself in books that offered escape from her reality. She taught herself from discarded textbooks, determined that poverty wouldn't steal her future. At night, she would sketch in her father's book, adding her own drawings beside his, maintaining a conversation with him through art even after his death. The city shelters offered temporary respite, but their overcrowded rooms and strict rules often felt more confining than the streets. Sarah preferred the relative freedom of finding her own safe spaces, even if it meant enduring cold nights and empty stomachs. She developed a sixth sense for danger, learning to read the intentions of strangers in their body language and tone. Her father's artistic talent had passed to her, and sometimes she would draw portraits for tourists, earning enough for a meal. These moments of connection with others were rare bright spots in her otherwise solitary existence. Yet she never allowed herself to become too comfortable with anyone, knowing from experience how quickly circumstances could change. The worst part wasn't the physical hardship, it was the loneliness. Sarah would watch families through restaurant windows, imagining what it would be like to belong somewhere. She created stories about her mother, wondering what desperate circumstances had led her to abandon her family. Despite everything, Sarah couldn't bring herself to hate the woman who had left her father's last wish for forgiveness had taken root too deeply. On particularly difficult nights, she would find herself in wealthy neighborhoods, drawn to the warmth glowing from mansion windows. She would imagine the lives lived inside these homes, not with envy, but with a deep curiosity about how fate determined such different paths for people. It was during one such night, exhausted and hungry, that Sarah found herself in the immaculate garden of the Anderson estate. The roses reminded her of the ones her father used to draw, and something about their perfection amidst her chaos drew her in. As she curled up behind a carefully manicured bush, she had no way of knowing that this garden belonged to the man who had married her mother, or that fate was about to orchestrate the most unlikely of family reunions. The irony of seeking shelter in her mother's garden was lost on Sarah as she drifted off to sleep, her father's sketchbook clutched to her chest. She was about to become the catalyst for exposing long-buried secrets and testing the true meaning of family, though at that moment, all she wanted was a safe place to rest for one night. Thomas Anderson's evening ritual of walking through his garden had become a form of meditation, a brief escape from the weight of running his company and managing his increasingly strained marriage. The late autumn air carried a bitter chill as he made his way along the carefully maintained paths, his breath visible in the moonlight. It was during these solitary moments that he felt most connected to his late mother's teachings about compassion and responsibility. As he rounded the corner near his prized rose bushes, a slight movement caught his eye. At first he thought it might be a stray cat. They occasionally sought shelter in the garden, despite the high fences and security systems. But as he moved closer, the sight before him stopped him in his tracks. A young girl, no more than 15, curled up beneath the roses, clutching what appeared to be an old book to her chest. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her frame painfully thin, yet there was something dignified about the way she held herself even in sleep. Thomas noticed her hands were stained with what looked like charcoal, an artist's hands, he thought. Despite her disheveled appearance, her face carried a peaceful expression that contrasted sharply with her obvious hardship. "Hello," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl's eyes snapped open, fear immediately replacing the serenity of sleep. She scrambled backward, her movements those of someone accustomed to running from danger. "It's all right," Thomas said, keeping his distance and raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl Sarah, though he didn't know her name, yet pressed herself against the garden wall, clutching her book like a shield. Her eyes darted between Thomas and the garden gate, calculating her escape route. Years of street survival had taught her to be wary of seemingly kind strangers, especially wealthy ones. "My name is Thomas Anderson. This is my home," he said, gesturing toward the mansion. "You must be freezing out here. When was the last time you had something to eat?" The mention of food made Sarah's stomach growl audibly, betraying her despite her attempt to maintain composure. Thomas noticed her shoulders trembling from the cold. Without thinking, he removed his expensive wool coat and held it out to her. "Here. Please. You need this more than I do." The simple act of offering his coat seemed to break through some barrier. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. I didn't mean to trespass," she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The roses. They reminded me of my father's drawings." She touched the sketchbook protectively, and Thomas noticed how her fingers lingered on its worn cover with obvious affection. Something about her vulnerability and the mention of her father struck a chord in Thomas. He thought of his own father, whose pursuit of wealth had often overshadowed compassion, and of his mother, who had taught him that true worth lay in how one treated those in need. "Listen," he said, taking a careful step forward. "I have a warm kitchen and plenty of food inside. No strings attached. You can leave whenever you want, but I can't in good conscience leave you out here in the cold." He saw the internal struggle play across her face, the street-smart wariness battling with desperate need. "Why?" she asked simply, her eyes searching his face for hidden motives. "Why would you help me?" Thomas considered her question carefully. because someone once taught me that we're all responsible for each other. And right now you need help. It's as simple as that." His honesty seemed to reach something in her, and he saw her shoulders relax slightly. As if on cue, a gust of wind swept through the garden, causing Sarah to shiver violently. Thomas held out his hand, not moving closer, leaving the choice entirely up to her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Sarah," she replied after a long pause, slowly reaching for his offered hand. "Sarah Miller." The moment she took his hand, Thomas felt an inexplicable sense that his life was about to change profoundly. Neither of them could have known the chain of events this simple act of kindness would set in motion, or that fate had orchestrated this meeting with an irony that would soon become clear. As they walked toward the warmth of the house, Thomas noticed how Sarah clutched her sketchbook with her free hand, as if it contained all that remained of her previous life. He couldn't have known that within those pages lay drawings that would later help unravel the complex web of lies and secrets surrounding his own family. The security lights illuminated their path to the house, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Behind one of the upstairs windows, Emily sat in her wheelchair, watching the scene unfold with growing unease, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse around her. Emily Anderson was reviewing social engagement invitations in her first-floor study when she heard the front door open. The sound of unfamiliar footsteps, hesitant, almost timid, immediately set her on edge. Wheeling herself to the doorway, she froze at the sight before her. Thomas, her husband, was leading a ragged-looking teenage girl into their immaculate home. "Thomas," her voice cut through the air like ice. "What is the meaning of this?" She gripped the wheels of her chair tightly, her knuckles turning white with tension. The girl Sarah seemed to shrink into herself, while Thomas straightened his shoulders, preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. "Emily, this is Sarah. I found her in our garden. She needs help, and I couldn't leave her out in the cold." His voice was firm but gentle, the same tone he often used when trying to reason with his wife about his charitable endeavors. Emily's eyes narrowed as they swept over Sarah's worn clothes and dirty shoes on her pristine marble floor. "And since when has our home become a homeless shelter?" Emily's words dripped with disdain. "Really, Thomas, your bleeding heart will be the ruin of us all. What will people say?" She wheeled herself closer, her presence commanding despite her seated position. Sarah took an instinctive step backward, but Thomas's hand on her shoulder kept her steady. "People will say we have basic human decency," Thomas replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "She's just a child, Emily. Look at her, really look at her." But Emily was already shaking her head, her perfectly manicured hands gripping her armrests. "A child who could be anyone, could have any number of dangerous connections. Have you completely lost your mind? We have a reputation to maintain." Emily's voice rose with each word, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Sarah stood silently, her eyes fixed on the floor, clutching her father's sketchbook like a lifeline. Thomas felt his patience wearing thin. "Emily, enough. Sarah is staying, at least for tonight. I've made my decision." The firmness in his tone surprised even him. Emily recoiled as if slapped, her face flushing with anger, and something else. Was it fear? "You've made your decision." Emily's laugh was bitter. "Just like you made the decision that night when you drove drunk. How well did that turn out for us?" Thomas, the words hung in the air like poison, and Sarah watched as Thomas's face drained of color. "That's not fair," Emily said quietly, pain evident in his voice. "This is different. This is about doing what's right." Emily wheeled herself around to face Sarah directly. "And you, girl, what's your angle here? Found yourself a wealthy mark, did you? Think you can worm your way into a comfortable life?" Her words were sharp, calculated to wound. Sarah finally looked up, meeting Emily's gaze. For a moment something passed between them, a flash of recognition, quickly buried beneath layers of hostility and fear. "I don't want anything from you, ma'am," Sarah said softly. "Mr. Anderson just offered me a warm meal. I can leave after that." "Emily," Thomas interjected, "she's staying." If you can't accept that, then perhaps you should retire to your room for the evening. His tone was final, brooking no further argument. Emily's face contorted with rage and something else, panic. Fine, she spat, wheeling herself toward the door. But remember this moment, Thomas. Remember it when everything we've built comes crashing down around us. She paused at the doorway, turning back to fix Sarah with a cold stare. And you, girl, don't get too comfortable. This isn't a fairy tale, and there are no happy endings here. As Emily disappeared down the hallway, the sound of her wheels on the hardwood floors echoing like distant thunder, Thomas turned to Sarah apologetically. I'm sorry about that. My wife. She's been through a lot. Please don't let her reaction make you feel unwelcome. Sarah nodded, but her eyes remained on the doorway where Emily had vanished. Something about the woman's hostility felt personal, as if she were fighting against more than just Sarah's presence. Neither of them could have known that Emily's reaction stemmed not from simple snobbery, but from a deep-seated fear of her past catching up with her. In her private room, Emily sat before her mirror, hands shaking as she opened her drawer and pulled out the old photograph she kept hidden. The baby in the picture smiled up at her, and for a moment Emily allowed herself to wonder about the strange coincidence of a homeless girl named Sarah appearing in her garden. But she quickly locked the photograph away, along with her doubts and fears. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let the past destroy her now. Michael Anderson sat in his dimly lit office, reviewing the security footage his private investigator had obtained of Sarah's arrival at the mansion. As the family's legal counsel and self-appointed guardian of the Anderson legacy, he viewed any threat to their reputation with grave concern. The girl's appearance had triggered something in his memory, a long-buried detail from when Emily first entered their lives. There's something about her, he muttered, pausing the video on Sarah's face. He remembered Emily's uncharacteristic panic when she first saw the girl, a reaction too extreme for mere social disapproval. Opening his laptop, he began digging through old family records, his legal training making him methodical in his search. Late into the night, Michael discovered an interesting detail: a substantial payment Emily had made to a private investigator 20 years ago, right before she married Thomas. The timing nagged at him. He made a call to an old contact in the records office, his voice low and urgent. I need everything you can find on an Emily Bennett from 20 years ago. Yes, it's sensitive. No, Thomas can't know. The information that arrived the next morning made his blood run cold. Emily Bennett had a child before meeting Thomas, a daughter named Sarah Miller, father James Miller, now deceased. The dates aligned perfectly. Michael's hands trembled as he realized the implications. The homeless girl his brother had taken in was, in all likelihood, Emily's abandoned daughter. This changes everything, he whispered to himself, calculating the potential impact on the family fortune. If Sarah was indeed Emily's daughter, she could have a claim to the Anderson wealth that Michael had always considered his future inheritance, given Thomas and Emily's childless marriage. He began building a detailed file, carefully documenting every connection. The girl's age, her father's name, the timing of Emily's marriage to Thomas, it all fit too perfectly to be coincidence. But rather than reveal this information, Michael saw an opportunity. Knowledge was power, and this knowledge could be particularly valuable. During family dinners, he watched Sarah intently, noting her mannerisms, the way she held herself. There was something of Emily in her, though few would notice without looking for it. He observed how Thomas grew increasingly protective of her, and how Emily seemed to crumble a little more each day under the weight of her secret. You seem very interested in our guest, Thomas remarked one evening, catching Michael staring at Sarah. Michael merely smiled, swirling his wine glass thoughtfully. Just concerned about the family's well-being, brother. Always concerned. In his private moments, Michael drafted various scenarios. The scandal of Emily's abandoned child could destroy the family's reputation unless handled properly. He considered blackmail, but dismissed it as too crude. No, this situation required a more permanent solution. The final piece fell into place when he discovered Sarah's father's death certificate. James Miller had died of cancer, unable to afford treatment. The bitter irony that Emily, living in luxury, had let her child's father die in poverty, it was the kind of detail that could destroy not just Emily's reputation, but the entire Anderson name. Michael began watching Sarah's movements around the house, noting her routines, her habits. The girl had an annoying tendency to survive despite adversity. If she stayed, she would eventually discover the truth, and Michael couldn't allow that to happen. The family fortune, his fortune, had to be protected. Late one night, as he reviewed his gathered evidence, Michael made his decision. The girl had to disappear, and it had to look like an accident. He began researching untraceable poisons, his legal mind methodically planning the perfect crime. Sometimes he reasoned to himself, protecting the family requires difficult decisions. What Michael didn't realize was that his obsession with removing Sarah had blinded him to other possibilities. As he plotted in his office, Sarah was unknowingly drawing closer to uncovering her own past through her father's sketchbook, a book that contained drawings of a younger Emily, drawings that would eventually expose everything Michael was trying to hide. The stage was set for a tragedy of Michael's own making, though not the one he intended. His determination to eliminate Sarah would lead to consequences he never anticipated, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy the very thing he sought to protect. The revelation began with a simple moment: Sarah sitting in the mansion's library, sketching in her father's old book while Thomas worked at his desk nearby. Their quiet companionship had become a regular occurrence, a peaceful respite from Emily's constant hostility and Michael's calculating stares. "Mr. Anderson," Sarah spoke softly, turning a weathered page. "Would you like to see some of my father's drawings?" The question seemed innocent enough, but it would trigger a cascade of discoveries that would shake the Anderson family to its core. Thomas moved to sit beside her, touched by this small gesture of trust. As Sarah carefully turned the pages, explaining each sketch, a particular drawing made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. There, rendered in delicate charcoal strokes, was a younger version of his wife, Emily, her face softer and more open than he'd ever seen it. "Sarah," he asked, his voice barely steady, "who is this woman?" His finger traced the date at the bottom of the page 20 years ago, before he'd met Emily. Sarah leaned closer, her expression wistful. "That's my mother. She left when I was very young. Dad kept drawing her from memory. He never stopped loving her, even after she abandoned us." The words hit Thomas like physical blows as pieces began falling into place. Emily's extreme reaction to Sarah's arrival, her desperate attempts to make the girl leave, the familiar features he'd noticed but couldn't quite place. At that moment, Emily wheeled herself into the library, freezing at the doorway when she saw what they were examining. The sketchbook slipped from Sarah's hands, falling open to another portrait of Emily, this one showing her cradling a baby Sarah. "Emily," Thomas said, his voice carrying a weight that made her flinch, "I think it's time you told us the truth." The color drained from Emily's face as she realized her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Sarah stood slowly, her eyes fixed on Emily with dawning recognition. "Mom," the word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emily's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I never meant," Emily began, but her voice failed her. 20 years of secrets and lies seemed to collapse in on themselves as she faced the daughter she'd abandoned and the husband she'd deceived. "All this time," Thomas said, his voice heavy with disbelief, "you've been treating your own daughter like an intruder, watching her suffer on the streets while we lived in luxury. How could you, Emily?" Sarah remained eerily still, her father's sketchbook clutched to her chest. "You let Dad die," she whispered, tears finally breaking through her composure. "He needed help, medical treatment we couldn't afford. You were here, living like this, and you let him die." Emily's facade cracked completely. "I was young. Poor. I wanted more than a life of struggling with an artist who couldn't provide. Her words echoed off the library walls, desperate and defensive. I made my choice and I lived with it. I built something here. Built on lies, Thomas interjected, his quiet tone more damning than any shout. Built on the suffering of your own child. The tension in the room was electric as Michael appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His expression shifted from curiosity to calculated interest as he assessed the scene before him. "Well," he said smoothly, "it seems the family's little secret is finally out." All heads turned to Michael, who stepped into the library with the air of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "You knew," Thomas demanded, rage coloring his voice. "Of course I knew," Michael replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "I've known since Sarah arrived. The question is, what happens now? This revelation could destroy everything: our reputation, our standing, our legacy." Sarah looked between the three adults, each representing a different facet of betrayal. Emily, the mother who abandoned her; Thomas, the unwitting stepfather who showed her more kindness than her own blood; and Michael, the uncle who had watched her suffer while holding the truth. "I think," Thomas said firmly, moving to stand beside Sarah, "that it's time we stopped worrying about reputations and started focusing on doing what's right." The words seemed to physically pain Emily, who began to cry silently in her wheelchair. Sarah took a deep breath, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "I never wanted your money or your reputation," she said, looking directly at Emily. "I just wanted to know why you could leave us so easily. Why you could watch me sleeping in your garden and still turn me away." The truth hung heavy in the library's air, a weight that would forever change the dynamics of the Anderson family. None of them could have known that this revelation was just the beginning, that Michael's knowledge of the truth had already set in motion a plan that would lead to an even greater tragedy. Thomas placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder, making his choice clear. "Sarah stays," he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument, "and we're going to make this right, no matter what it costs." Emily's sob echoed through the room as she realized the life she'd built was forever changed. Michael slipped away silently, his mind already calculating how to use this situation to his advantage. And Sarah stood in the middle of it all, her father's sketchbook, the unknowing catalyst of this revelation, held tight against her heart. The days following the revelation of Sarah's identity transformed the Anderson mansion into a battlefield of silent tensions and explosive confrontations. Every meal became an exercise in barely contained hostility, with Emily refusing to meet her daughter's eyes and Michael watching the drama unfold with calculating interest. But one morning, the tension finally erupted during breakfast. Emily, wheeling herself to the table, found Sarah sitting in what had always been her place, a symbolic gesture that sent her over the edge. "You think you can just slide into my life and take everything, don't you?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. Thomas immediately rose to Sarah's defense. "Emily, she's your daughter, not some intruder trying to steal your life." His voice carried through the massive dining room, bouncing off the crystal chandelier that suddenly seemed to mock their family's facade of perfection. "My daughter," Emily laughed bitterly, her hands gripping her wheelchair's armrests. "I gave up that right 20 years ago, and I'm not about to reclaim it now. She's a reminder of everything I worked so hard to forget: the poverty, the struggle, the shame." Sarah, who had been quietly enduring these outbursts for days, finally broke her silence. "I never asked to be born into your shame," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "And I never asked to be found. You did that yourself when you married a man with enough humanity to help a homeless girl." The truth of Sarah's words seemed to physically pain Emily. She wheeled herself backward, nearly colliding with Michael, who had been watching the scene unfold from the doorway. "This girl." Emily gestured wildly at Sarah. "She'll destroy everything we've built. Can't you see that, Thomas? Our reputation, our standing, it's all at risk." Thomas slammed his hand on the table, causing the fine china to rattle. "Enough. Our reputation. Is that all you care about? What about basic human decency? What about the fact that you let your child's father die in poverty while you lived in luxury? Michael chose this moment to intervene, his voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. Thomas, you're being rather harsh. Emily made her choices long before you knew her. And Sarah, well, she seems to be causing quite a bit of discord in our previously peaceful home. Previously peaceful, Thomas turned on his brother. You mean previously fraudulent? We've been living a lie, Michael. And you knew and said nothing. Sarah stood up slowly, her father's sketchbook clutched to her chest like armor. I should go. I never meant to cause such chaos, but Thomas caught her arm gently, keeping her in place. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. This is your home now, whether they like it or not. Emily made her choice 20 years ago, now she has to live with the consequences. But Emily wheeled herself to the window, her back to the room. Then I'll leave, she announced, her voice cold. I won't stay here and watch my past destroy my present. Thomas, you have a choice to make your wife or this. Reminder of my mistakes. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Thomas. His response would determine the future of the Anderson family. If you're asking me to choose between protecting an innocent girl, your daughter, and maintaining our comfortable lives, then you've already lost me, Emily. Michael's eyes narrowed at this declaration. Brother, think carefully about what you're doing. Family loyalty. Family loyalty, Thomas interrupted. What about loyalty to basic human decency? What about loyalty to a child who never asked to be born into this mess? Sarah watched the exchange with growing distress. Please stop fighting because of me. I've survived on my own before, I can do it again. No, Thomas said firmly. The time for running is over for all of us. He turned to Emily, his expression resolute. You can leave if you want to, Emily, but Sarah stays. I won't abandon her the way you did. Emily's face contorted with a mixture of rage and pain. Very well, she whispered. You've made your choice. But remember this moment, Thomas. Remember it when everything falls apart. As Emily wheeled herself out of the room, Michael following close behind, Thomas turned to Sarah, who stood shell-shocked by the morning's events. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant for any of this to happen. Thomas pulled her into a protective embrace. None of this is your fault, Sarah. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better than living a lie. What he didn't know was that Michael, watching from the doorway, was already formulating a plan to protect the family fortune, a plan that would have devastating consequences for them all. The breakfast dishes lay forgotten on the table, witnesses to a family fracturing under the weight of long-buried secrets. Outside, storm clouds gathered, as if nature itself were preparing for the tragedy that was yet to come. The evening after the breakfast confrontation, Emily summoned Thomas to her private sitting room. The space, decorated in muted blues and silvers, had once been their sanctuary for intimate conversations. Now it felt like a war room, with Emily positioned in her wheelchair by the window, her silhouette sharp against the setting sun. Do you remember when we first met, Thomas, she asked without turning around. You said I was the most elegant woman you'd ever seen. If only you had known what I really was, a desperate girl running from her past. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching his wife's reflection in the window. The past has caught up with us, Emily. We can't keep pretending. She wheeled around to face him, her expression hardened with resolve. Can't we? We've been pretending for 20 years. I've been the perfect wife, haven't I? Hosting your business dinners, supporting your charitable works, maintaining our social standing, even after the accident confined me to this chair. Oh, and at what cost, Thomas countered. Look at what your pretense has done to Sarah, your own daughter, sleeping on the streets while we lived in luxury. Emily's laugh was brittle. My daughter. She stopped being my daughter the moment I chose this life, our life. And now you want to destroy everything we've built because of some misplaced guilt. This isn't about guilt, Thomas insisted. It's about doing what's right. Sarah deserves a chance at the life you denied her. And what about my life? Emily's voice rose. Everything I've worked for, everything I've become, you expect me to watch it all crumble because that girl showed up in our garden. Thomas moved closer, kneeling beside her wheelchair. Emily, we could make this right. We could be a family, a real one, not this facade we've been maintaining. A family, Emily's voice dripped with contempt. With the living embodiment of my greatest shame. No, Thomas, I won't do it. I can't. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair until her knuckles turned white. So here's my ultimatum. Either she goes, or I do. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas stood slowly, his expression pained but resolute. You can't ask me to send her back to the streets. She's just a child, Emily. Your child. She is nothing to me. Emily's shout echoed off the walls. Nothing but a mistake I buried 20 years ago. Make your choice, Thomas. Your wife of 15 years or a street urchin you've known for weeks. You know it's not that simple, Thomas replied quietly. This isn't just about Sarah or you or me. It's about what kind of people we choose to be. Emily wheeled closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Oh, but it is that simple. Choose Thomas. Right now. And remember, if you choose her, you're not just losing me. You're losing everything we've built together. Every connection, every business contact, every social advantage. But are you threatening me? Thomas asked, incredulous. I'm stating facts, Emily replied coldly. You think our social circle will embrace you after I tell them how you threw away our marriage for a homeless girl? How you chose a street child over your invalid wife? Thomas stared at her, finally seeing the full extent of her capacity for cruelty. The woman I married would never be this heartless. The woman you married never existed, Emily shot back. She was a creation, a carefully crafted image designed to escape poverty, and now you want me to embrace the very thing I spent my life running from. No, Thomas said quietly. I want you to embrace your humanity. Your daughter needs you, Emily. But I needed things once too. Emily's voice cracked slightly. I needed to escape a life of constant struggle. I needed to be more than just another poor girl with a baby she couldn't support. I made my choice then, and I'm making it now. She straightened in her wheelchair, her face settling into lines of cold determination. Send her away, Thomas. Send her away, or I leave and I take everything with me. Thomas looked at his wife, this woman he thought he knew, and felt a profound sadness. You've already made your choice, haven't you? You made it 20 years ago when you abandoned your daughter, and you're making it again now. Yes, Emily agreed, her voice steady. I am. The question is, what choice will you make? Thomas moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. I choose to be someone I can live with, Emily. Someone who doesn't turn their back on a child in need, especially not twice. As he left the room, Emily's voice followed him. Then you've chosen to destroy us all, Thomas. Remember that when everything falls apart. What neither of them knew was that Michael stood in the shadows of the hallway, listening to every word. His mind was already working, calculating how to use this fracture to his advantage. Emily's ultimatum had set the stage for his own plans that would lead to consequences none of them could have anticipated. The sun had fully set now, leaving Emily alone in the darkened room, her silhouette once again a sharp outline against the window. In the garden below, she could see Sarah walking among the roses, Thomas joining her with protective gentleness. The sight hardened something inside Emily, turning the last remnants of maternal feeling to stone. In the weeks following Emily's ultimatum, Sarah found herself living in a strange limbo within the Anderson mansion. The physical comforts were undeniable: a warm bed, regular meals, clean clothes, but the emotional atmosphere was suffocating. Every corner of the grand house seemed to hold another reminder that she was an unwanted intruder in a world that had rejected her even before her birth. Mornings were particularly challenging. Sarah would descend the sweeping staircase to find Emily already positioned at the breakfast table, her wheelchair angled just so, deliberately turning away as her daughter entered the room. The house staff, picking up on the tension, treated Sarah with a careful politeness that barely masked their uncertainty about her position in the household. "Good morning," Sarah would say softly each day, her voice growing quieter with each ignored greeting. Emily's response was always the same, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, a delicate adjustment of her teacup, and complete silence. Thomas, when present, would try to bridge the gulf between mother and daughter, but his efforts only seemed to heighten the awkwardness. One morning, Sarah attempted to help clear the breakfast dishes, seeking any way to prove her worth. As she reached for Emily's plate, her mother recoiled as if touched by something unclean. "The servants can manage," Emily said icily. "We wouldn't want you to forget your position here." Sarah retreated to the garden, her sanctuary among the roses that had first drawn her to this place. There, among the flowers her father had so lovingly sketched, she would open his old book and lose herself in his artwork. The pages were filled with portraits of a younger Emily, smiling, laughing, holding baby Sarah with what appeared to be genuine love. "Your father was quite talented," Thomas said one afternoon, finding her there. He sat beside her on the garden bench, careful to give her space while offering support. "He saw beauty in everything, didn't he?" "Even in her," Sarah replied quietly, tracing a sketch of Emily. "He never stopped believing there was good in her, even after she left. He used to tell me stories about how kind she was, how she would sing to me when I was a baby." Thomas watched as Sarah turned to a new page, a detailed drawing of Emily reading to an infant Sarah, both of them bathed in warm lamplight. "It's hard to reconcile these images with the woman she became," he admitted. Sarah closed the book carefully, her fingers lingering on its worn cover. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm the one who changed her, if having me somehow broke something inside her that couldn't be fixed." "No," Thomas said firmly. "Emily's choices were her own. You are a child deserving of love and protection. Never doubt that." But doubt plagued Sarah constantly. She felt it in the whispers of the house staff when they thought she couldn't hear, in the way Michael watched her with calculating eyes during family dinners, in the painful silence that followed her through the mansion's elegant halls. She tried to make herself useful, to prove she wasn't the burden Emily claimed. She helped the gardener tend the roses, organized Thomas's library, even attempted to learn proper table etiquette from the sympathetic housekeeper. But each effort seemed to only emphasize her otherness in this world of privilege. One evening, she overheard two maids discussing her presence. "It's not natural," one whispered. "Mrs. Anderson can barely look at her. There must be more to the story than we know. Mr. Anderson's charity will be the ruin of this family," the other replied. "Mark my words." Sarah slipped away silently, her heart heavy. That night she wrote in her journal, "Sometimes being wanted by one person makes the rejection of another hurt even more. Dad always said love was stronger than pride, but here pride seems to poison everything it touches." Thomas found her the next morning in the library, asleep over her father's sketchbook. He gently draped a blanket over her shoulders, noting the dried tears on her cheeks. On the open page, Sarah had begun anew, drawing a self-portrait, showing herself standing between two worlds, one foot in the garden where Thomas had found her, the other in the mansion that still didn't feel like home. "She's so much like him," Emily said unexpectedly from the doorway, her voice carrying a hint of something almost like regret. When Thomas turned to respond, she was already gone, leaving only the echo of her wheelchair's wheels on the hardwood floor. Sarah stirred, quickly wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, I must have fallen asleep studying." The lie was gentle, an attempt to maintain dignity in a house where her every move was scrutinized. "You have nothing to apologize for," Thomas assured her. "This is your home now, Sarah, no matter what anyone else says." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. The mansion's walls held too many secrets, too much pain, too many years of carefully constructed lies. Sarah might have found shelter within them, but true belonging seemed as distant as the mother who refused to acknowledge her existence. In her room that evening, Sarah stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. She could see pieces of Emily in her features, the same proud chin, the same delicate hands. But where Emily's eyes held cold determination, Sarah's reflected a depth of compassion inherited from her father. She wondered, not for the first time, which legacy would ultimately shape her future. As autumn deepened into winter, an unexpected warmth began to grow within the cold halls of the Anderson mansion. Despite Emily's continued hostility and Michael's watchful suspicion, Thomas and Sarah found themselves developing a relationship that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. It began in small moments: shared cups of hot chocolate in the library, quiet conversations in the garden, collaborative efforts to organize Thomas's massive book collection. One particularly cold morning, Thomas found Sarah in his study, carefully examining the portrait of his mother that hung above the fireplace. She had kind eyes, Sarah observed, not turning around, like she could see past people's surfaces to what really mattered. "She would have loved you," Thomas replied softly, surprising himself with the depth of emotion in his voice. "She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in how we treat others." Sarah turned to him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why do you care so much? You don't owe me anything. I'm not your responsibility." Thomas crossed the room to stand beside her, both of them looking up at his mother's portrait. "Maybe that's exactly why I care. Because someone should, without obligation or expectation. Because it's the right thing to do." Their relationship deepened through shared interests and mutual understanding. Thomas discovered Sarah's talent for mathematics when he found her solving complex equations for fun. He began bringing her business problems to tackle, delighting in her quick mind and fresh perspective. "You see solutions where others see obstacles," he told her one evening, as they reviewed a particularly challenging project. "That's a rare gift, Sarah." She ducked her head, still uncomfortable with praise. "Dad used to say the same thing. He said art and mathematics were just different languages for understanding the world." Thomas started including Sarah in his charitable work, taking her to visit the shelters and programs he supported. Her insight, shaped by personal experience, proved invaluable. She understood the pride that often prevented people from accepting help, the dignity that needed to be preserved even in acts of charity. During one such visit, they encountered a young mother with 2 small children, clearly hesitant to enter the shelter. Sarah approached her gently, speaking in low tones that Thomas couldn't quite hear. Minutes later, the woman was inside, her children clutching warm meals. "What did you say to her?" Thomas asked as they drove home. Sarah stared out the window at the passing city lights. "I told her that accepting help doesn't make her weak, it makes her strong enough to put her children's needs first. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let others care for us." Thomas glanced at her profile, struck by the wisdom in her words. "You're remarkable, you know that." She smiled slightly, still looking out the window. "I had a good teacher. Dad always said that hardship either breaks you or teaches you compassion. He chose compassion. So did you." Their evenings often found them in the library, Sarah working on her studies. Thomas had arranged for private tutoring to help her catch up on her education while he handled business correspondence. The comfortable silence between them was occasionally broken by shared observations or quiet laughter. One night, Sarah fell asleep over her books. Thomas gently removed them from her lap, noticing she had been reading about business administration. A note fell from between the pages, written in her careful hand, "Maybe someday I can help others the way Mr. Anderson helps me." He carefully tucked the note back into the book, emotion tightening his throat. That night he made a decision. The next morning he called his lawyers to begin the process of legally adopting Sarah. When he told her his intention, her reaction surprised him. Instead of joy, she showed concern. "But Emily, won't this make things even worse? And Michael, he already thinks I'm trying to steal the family fortune." Thomas took her hands in his. "Listen to me, Sarah. You deserve a family who chooses you, who celebrates you, who helps you become the person you're meant to be. I want to be that family." For the first time since entering the Anderson household, Sarah broke down completely, allowing Thomas to hold her as she cried not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally belonging somewhere. Neither of them noticed Emily watching from the doorway, her hands gripping her wheelchair's armrests until her knuckles turned white, nor did they see Michael in the shadows, his face darkening with each display of their growing bond. The affection between Thomas and Sarah would soon become the catalyst for tragedy, though in that moment it felt like the beginning of healing. That evening, Thomas added a new photo beside his mother's portrait, Sarah, caught in a moment of unguarded joy, laughing in the garden she had come to love. The two images seemed to speak to each other across time, both women embodying the values he held most dear: compassion, courage, and the strength to choose love over convention. In his private study, Michael Anderson sat surrounded by legal documents, property deeds, and bank statements, the paper trail of the Anderson family fortune. His laptop displayed Sarah's newly begun adoption paperwork, the cursor blinking accusingly on the screen. With each passing day, his carefully laid plans for inheriting the family wealth seemed to slip further from his grasp. "This won't do at all," he muttered, reaching for the crystal decanter of scotch that had become his frequent companion during late-night plotting sessions. The amber liquid caught the lamplight as he poured, his hands steady despite the turmoil in his mind. Michael had always seen himself as the true guardian of the Anderson legacy. While Thomas wasted time and resources on charitable endeavors, Michael had focused on preserving and expanding their wealth. The arrival of Sarah, and worse, Thomas's growing attachment to her, threatened everything he'd worked for. He opened a hidden safe behind an ornate painting, removing a thick file labeled Miller S. Inside were the results of his private investigation: Sarah's birth certificate, James Miller's death certificate, old photographs of Emily with James, and most damning of all, documentation of Emily's systematic rejection of James's pleas for financial help during his illness. "Such a tragic story," Michael whispered to himself, a cold smile playing at his lips. A dying father, an abandoned child, a mother who chose wealth over love. The papers would love it. He had thought to use this information as leverage, but Thomas's decision to adopt Sarah had forced his hand. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a contact listed only as J. The message he typed was brief: "Need the package we discussed. Must be untraceable." Time sensitive, the response came quickly. Expensive. Risky. Michael's reply was immediate: "Money no object. Just get it done." As he waited, Michael reviewed his plan again. The poison would be tasteless, odorless, and would mimic the symptoms of a severe allergic reaction. Sarah's death would appear tragic but natural, just another sad story of a street child who couldn't be saved, despite Thomas's best efforts. He moved to the window, watching Sarah and Thomas walking in the garden below. They were laughing about something, the sound carrying faintly through the glass. For a moment Michael felt a flicker of doubt, quickly suppressed. Sentiment is a weakness, he reminded himself, words his father had drilled into him from childhood. The next day, Jay delivered a small vial of clear liquid, leaving it in an agreed-upon location. Michael retrieved it wearing gloves, careful to leave no trace. That evening, he studied the household's dinner routine, noting how the staff placed and served each course. What he hadn't counted on was Sarah's growing popularity below stairs. The kitchen staff had taken to preparing special treats for her, the maids delighted in helping her choose appropriate clothes, and even the stern butler had been seen smiling at her earnest attempts to learn proper etiquette. Mr. Michael, the cook, stopped him one evening as he prowled the kitchen. "Looking for something special? I've just made Miss Sarah's favorite chocolate cake. She's been such a dear, helping me organize my recipes." Michael forced a smile. "How?" Touching, he retreated, realizing he would need to be more careful. The servants couldn't be allowed to suspect anything when the time came. In his room that night, Michael reviewed the mansion's security camera footage, mapping out blind spots and staff patterns. He noted Sarah's habits, which food she preferred, where she sat at meals, how she took her tea. Each detail was meticulously recorded in a small notebook he kept locked in his desk. The final catalyst came when Thomas called a family meeting to formally announce his intention to adopt Sarah. Michael watched Emily's face contort with rage, but it was Thomas's next statement that cemented his resolve. Furthermore, Thomas declared, "I'll be restructuring the family trust to include Sarah as a full beneficiary. It's time we acknowledged her rightful place in this family." Later that night, Michael made his final preparations. The family dinner planned for the following evening would provide the perfect opportunity. He carefully measured the poison, rehearsing the movements required to ensure it reached the correct plate. What Michael didn't realize was that his obsession with removing Sarah had made him careless. He failed to notice the young maid who saw him practicing with the vial, or the gardener who discovered his discarded gloves. Most crucially, he overlooked the security camera he himself had installed years ago, its lens capturing his late-night preparations in silent witness. As he finished his planning, Michael raised his glass in a mock toast to the family portrait on his wall. To the Anderson legacy, he murmured, and the sacrifices required to protect it. The irony that he would soon become the architect of the family's greatest tragedy was lost on him, consumed as he was by his own ambition. Outside his study, the mansion slept, unaware of the darkness brewing within its walls. Sarah dreamed of her new future, Thomas planned the adoption celebration, and Emily nursed her bitter resentment. None of them suspected that Michael's desperate grasp for control would soon shatter their world in ways none of them could have anticipated. The evening of the family dinner arrived with an air of foreboding. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier's light, fine china gleamed on the mahogany table, and tension hung thick in the air like invisible smoke. Thomas had insisted on this formal dinner to announce Sarah's adoption, oblivious to the darkness lurking behind Michael's practiced smile. Sarah entered the dining room wearing a simple blue dress, her first new one, chosen with Thomas's gentle guidance. Her attempts to tame her unruly hair and mirror the polished appearance of her new family only highlighted her underlying nervousness. Emily, positioned at one end of the table in her wheelchair, deliberately looked away as her daughter approached. "You look lovely," Thomas whispered encouragingly as Sarah took her seat. Michael, watching the exchange, felt his jaw tighten. He patted his jacket pocket, feeling the small vial through the fabric, and nodded to the server he had secretly paid to ensure the correct placement of dishes. "Before we begin," Thomas stood, raising his glass, "I want to make an announcement. As you all know, I've begun the process of legally adopting Sarah. Today, the initial paperwork was approved." He smiled warmly at Sarah, who blushed under the attention. "Furthermore, I've decided to make her a full beneficiary of the Anderson Trust." The crystal in Emily's hand trembled visibly. "You can't be serious, Thomas. This girl appears out of nowhere, and suddenly she's entitled to generations of Anderson wealth." "This girl is your daughter," Emily, Thomas responded firmly, "and it's time we made things right." Michael chose this moment to rise, his own glass held high. "Well, we should toast then, shouldn't we?" 2. Family. His smile never reached his eyes as he nodded to the server to begin serving the main course. The poison was meant for Sarah's plate, a specially prepared dish that Michael had orchestrated through careful manipulation of the kitchen staff. He watched intently as the servers moved around the table, his heart pounding with anticipation. But fate had other plans. In the complexity of service, plates were shifted, orders confused. Michael felt a cold sweat break out as he lost track of the poisoned dish in the choreography of dinner service. His eyes darted frantically between the plates being set down, trying to identify which one contained his deadly preparation. Thomas was deep in conversation with Sarah about her future educational plans when Michael realized, with horror, that the poisoned plate had been placed in front of him. Before he could stop himself, he had taken a bite. The food was halfway down his throat when recognition dawned. "No," he gasped, his fork clattering against fine china. All eyes turned to him as color drained from his face. This can't. Michael Thomas rose in alarm as his brother clutched his throat. What's wrong? Sarah, who had been about to take her first bite, froze at the sight of Michael's distress. Years of street survival had taught her to recognize danger, and something in Michael's expression triggered her instincts. "Something's wrong with him," she said, standing up. "He needs help." Michael's eyes locked onto Sarah's untouched plate, and in his panic he revealed his hand. The plate. It was supposed to be. Her plate. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Thomas's face transformed with understanding and rage. "What did you do, Michael? What did you put in the food?" Emily sat paralyzed in her wheelchair, watching her brother-in-law's face contort in pain. The perfect family dinner she had dreaded had transformed into something far more horrific than she could have imagined. "Call an ambulance," Thomas shouted, but even as servants scrambled to obey, they all could see it was too late. The poison chosen for its speed and efficiency was already taking its toll. Sarah stood frozen, the reality of what had nearly happened to her sinking in. The man she had tried so hard to please, whose approval she had sought despite his cold demeanor, had actually tried to kill her. Michael's last words came out in a choked whisper, "The fortune. It was supposed to be mine." "All mine," then he slumped forward, his face falling into the plate that had been meant for Sarah. The dining room erupted into chaos. Servants rushed in all directions. Emily wheeled herself backward in horror, and Thomas pulled Sarah into a protective embrace. The crystal chandelier continued to sparkle indifferently above them, casting rainbow refractions across Michael's still form. As the first sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah looked at her untouched plate with newfound understanding. The family dinner that was meant to celebrate her acceptance into the Anderson family had instead exposed the darkest consequences of greed and desperation. In the hours following Michael's death, the Anderson mansion transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Police officers moved through the elegant rooms, their heavy boots incongruous against the Persian carpets. Crime scene technicians photographed the dining room, the flash of their cameras reflecting off the crystal chandelier that had witnessed the tragedy. Thomas sat in his study with Sarah, his arm protectively around her shoulders as they gave their statements to the detectives. The gravity of what had nearly happened, what had actually happened, seemed to age him visibly. Every few minutes his arm would tighten around Sarah, as if reassuring himself that she was still there, still safe. "He tried to kill me," Sarah whispered, her voice hollow with disbelief. All because of money. The confusion in her voice reflected her father's values. James Miller had taught her that love and creativity were worth more than any fortune. Emily remained in the dining room, insisted on staying near Michael's body until it was taken away. Her wheelchair positioned at the table where they had all sat just hours before, she stared at the chair where her brother-in-law had taken his last breath. Her face was a mask of shock and something deeper recognition, perhaps, of how far the pursuit of wealth could drive someone. The police discovered the vial in Michael's pocket, along with his meticulously detailed notebooks outlining his plan. His study yielded more evidence: the file on Sarah, correspondence with the poison supplier, security camera footage he had forgotten to delete. The case was clear-cut: attempted murder that had backfired fatally on its perpetrator. As dawn approached, the last police car finally left the mansion's circular drive. The house staff moved silently through the rooms, removing the evidence of the investigation: the crime scene tape, the chalk marks, the disturbed furniture. But they couldn't erase the memory of what had happened, or the way it had exposed the fractures in the Anderson family. "I should leave," Sarah said quietly as she and Thomas watched the sunrise from his study. "I'm tearing this family apart. Michael is dead because of me." Thomas turned to her sharply. "No. Michael is dead because of his own choices, his own greed. You are not responsible for his actions or anyone else's." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. You belong here, Sarah. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Down the hall, Emily sat alone in her room, turning an old photograph in her hands herself and Michael at a charity gala years ago, both of them smiling with the satisfied confidence of the wealthy and privileged. "We were so certain," she murmured to the image, "so certain about everything." The household settled into an uneasy quiet. The staff whispered among themselves about the tragedy, about how Miss Sarah had nearly been the victim, about how Mr. Michael had brought about his own destruction. Their loyalty, already tilting towards Sarah, solidified in the face of what might have happened to her. Thomas spent the morning making necessary arrangements for Michael's funeral, for increased security, for psychological support for the household. But his primary concern remained Sarah. He found her in the garden, sitting among the roses that had first brought her to their door. "I keep thinking about what he said at the end," she told Thomas as he sat beside her. "It was supposed to be mine. How can someone want money so badly they'd kill for it?" Thomas had no answer that could make sense of his brother's actions. Instead, he shared stories of a different Michael, the brother who had once helped him build a treehouse, who had defended him from bullies at school. "People can change," he said sadly, "sometimes in ways we never expect." Emily wheeled herself to the garden's edge, watching them but not approaching. The sight of them together, Thomas and the daughter she had abandoned, stirred something in her she couldn't quite name. Was it regret, envy, or something closer to recognition of what she had thrown away in her own pursuit of status and security? As evening fell again, the mansion's windows lit up one by one like eyes opening after a long nightmare. The dinner dishes had been cleared away, the dining room restored to its former elegance, but nothing could truly return to how it was before. Michael's death had changed them all, exposing the true cost of greed and the unexpected bonds of family. Sarah stood at her window, looking out over the garden where her story with the Andersons had begun. In her hand she held her father's sketchbook, open to a drawing of her mother in happier times. "Dad," she whispered, "I wish you could tell me what to do now." Below, Thomas walked the darkened grounds, his brother's final moments replaying in his mind. The weight of leadership had always been his to bear, but never had it felt heavier than now, as he tried to hold together what remained of his fractured family. The night after Michael's death, Sarah couldn't sleep. The moonlight filtering through her bedroom window cast strange shadows that seemed to dance with accusation. Every creak of the old mansion's settling made her start, memories of Michael's final moments playing on endless loop in her mind. At 3 in the morning she made her decision. Moving silently, a skill learned from years on the streets, she packed a small bag with essentials, her father's sketchbook, a change of clothes, the little money she had saved from Thomas's generous allowance. She paused at her desk to write a letter, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to explain her choice. "Dear Mr. Anderson," she began, then crossed it out. "Dear Thomas, I can't stay here knowing I'm the reason your brother died. Your kindness has meant everything to me. But I bring destruction to everyone I love. Dad died because Mom chose wealth over helping him. Now Michael is dead because of money too. I won't let anyone else be hurt because of me." She left the note on her perfectly made bed, a final gesture of respect for the home that had almost been hers. The mansion was silent as she crept downstairs, avoiding the creaky third step she'd learned to navigate in her weeks there. In the kitchen, she hesitated before the refrigerator, remembering her days of hunger, but taking food felt like stealing now, so she turned away. The garden doors opened silently. She had oiled the hinges herself just days ago, a small contribution to the household that now served her escape. The roses that had first sheltered her seemed to reach for her as she passed, their perfume a farewell blessing in the night air. At the garden gate, Sarah allowed herself one last look at the mansion. Light still burned in Thomas's study. He hadn't slept since Michael's death, consumed by arrangements and investigations. In Emily's window, a shadow moved restlessly, her mother's wheelchair pacing the confined space of her guilt. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered to them both, though they couldn't hear. "I'm sorry I came into your lives and brought such chaos." Then she slipped through the gate and into the darkness that had been her home for so long. Dawn found Thomas knocking on Sarah's door, concerned when she hadn't appeared for breakfast. The silence that answered him sent a chill through his heart. Sarah, he opened the door to find the perfectly made bed, the letter centered on the pillow. His hands shook as he read her words. "No, no, no," he muttered, rushing to check her closet, her drawers, knowing already what he would find. The few possessions she had accumulated in her time with them were gone, leaving only emptiness behind. Emily found him sitting on Sarah's bed, the letter crumpled in his fist. "She's gone," he said without looking up. "She thinks she's protecting us by leaving." The bitterness in his laugh cut through the morning quiet. "Everyone leaves in the end, don't they, Emily?" His wife wheeled closer, her face unreadable. "Thomas," she began, but he cut her off. Don't say anything unless you're ready to help find her." He stood, suddenly energized by purpose. "I'm not losing her too. Not like this." The household mobilized with surprising speed. The staff, who had come to care for Sarah, spread out across the grounds searching for any sign of which direction she had taken. Thomas called his contacts in the city: shelter managers, social workers, anyone who might spot a teenage girl on the streets. But Sarah had learned invisibility as a survival skill long before she came to the Andersons. She moved through the city like a ghost, avoiding the places she knew Thomas would look for her. The skills that had kept her alive on the streets now served to keep her hidden from the only person who had ever truly wanted to find her. As night fell again, Thomas stood in the garden where he had first found Sarah. The roses she had helped tend swayed in the evening breeze, their beauty now a reminder of all he had lost. Behind him, the mansion's windows blazed with light, as if trying to guide Sarah home. Emily wheeled herself to his side, her own grief finally breaking through her careful facade. "She's just like me," she whispered, "running away because she thinks it's best for everyone else. I taught her that, didn't I? By example." Thomas didn't answer. He was remembering Sarah's face the first time he showed her the library, the way her eyes lit up at the sight of so many books. He thought of her careful attempts to learn proper table manners, her genuine delight in helping the gardener, her quiet strength in the face of Emily's rejection. "She belongs here," he said finally. "And I'm going to find her, Emily. With or without your help." He turned to his wife, challenge in his eyes. "The question is, are you ready to be her mother? Or are you going to keep running too?" The night settled around them, full of possibilities and regrets. Somewhere in the darkness, Sarah was alone again, carrying the weight of guilt that wasn't hers to bear. And in the garden where their story began, Thomas made a silent promise to the daughter of his heart he would find her, and this time he would make sure she knew she was worth staying for. The weeks following Sarah's disappearance and Michael's death transformed Emily Anderson. She moved into a separate wing of the mansion, refusing most visitors and spending long hours staring at old photographs. Her wheelchair became less a means of mobility and more a throne of self-imposed exile, where she sat wrestling with demons only she could see. One rainy morning, Emily wheeled herself to Michael's former study, now sealed with police tape. Using the spare key she had always kept, she entered the room that still held echoes of her brother-in-law's presence. What she found there shattered what remained of her carefully constructed world. Michael's detailed files about her past, including photographs of James Miller in his final days, thin and desperate in a hospital bed she had refused to help pay for. "I did this," she whispered to the empty room. "All of it. James, Sarah, Michael, their blood is on my hands." Her fingers trembled as she touched a photograph of James holding baby Sarah, his artist's hands gentle around their daughter's tiny form. The date stamp showed it was taken just weeks after she had left them. That night, Emily made a decision. She called her lawyer, instructing him to prepare documents that would ensure Sarah would inherit her personal fortune separate from the Anderson family wealth. "It's time to make things right," she told him. her voice carrying a finality that made him pause. The next morning, she insisted on moving to her family's old country house, despite Thomas's objections. "I need space," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Space to think, to understand what I've done." The truth was, she couldn't bear the sight of Sarah's empty room, the gardens where her daughter had found brief happiness, the dining room where Michael had died. The country house was a shadow of its former glory, much like Emily herself. She dismissed the staff Thomas tried to send with her, preferring solitude as she wheeled through empty rooms filled with memories of a time before ambition had poisoned her soul. In her first week alone, Emily began writing letters to Sarah, to James, to the young woman she had once been. She wrote about her fears of poverty, her desperate need to escape her circumstances, her shame at abandoning her child. The letters piled up, unsent, each one a confession she had never been brave enough to make. But one particularly dark night, Emily attempted to navigate the steep stairs to the upper floor, determined to retrieve an old photo album from her childhood room. Her wheelchair caught on the carpet, and for a moment she teetered on the edge. Time seemed to slow as she realized what was about to happen. In that final moment, clarity came to Emily Anderson. She saw herself as she truly was, not the polished socialite she had become, but the frightened young mother who had chosen status over love. She thought of Sarah, somewhere out in the world alone again, because of choices Emily had made. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though there was no one to hear. The fall was quick. They found her the next morning when Thomas, worried by her failure to answer his calls, sent someone to check on her. She lay at the bottom of the stairs, her wheelchair overturned beside her, a strange peace on her face that hadn't been there in life. Among her papers they found a letter addressed to Sarah, dated the night of her death. "My dearest daughter, I've spent 20 years running from the truth that my greatest failure wasn't being poor but being a coward. I left you and your father because I was afraid of a life without privilege, without status. In doing so, I gave up the only real privilege that mattered, the chance to watch you grow, to love you, to be your mother. I saw you in our garden that first night, sleeping among the roses, and I knew you instantly. You have your father's heart, his gentle spirit, his courage. Everything good in you comes from him. Everything broken in you is my doing. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But know this, you were never the mistake. I was. The mistake was thinking wealth could fill the hole left by abandoning love. All my worldly possessions are yours now. It's a poor replacement for a mother's love, but it's all I have left to give. I love you, Sarah. I'm sorry it took losing everything to finally be able to say those words. Mom." The letter, along with Emily's other writings, would remain undiscovered for days, sealed in her private study, while the household grappled with this new tragedy. Thomas, upon hearing the news, stood in the garden where he had first found Sarah, wondering how much loss one family could bear. In death, Emily Anderson finally achieved what had eluded her in life: honesty. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for decades crumbled, revealing the tortured soul beneath. Her final act, willing her fortune to the daughter she had abandoned, was perhaps her first step toward redemption, though she wouldn't live to see if it was enough. The news of Emily's death spread through the Anderson household like a slow-moving poison. Staff members whispered in corners, their voices hushed with a mixture of shock and something closer to understanding. In the span of weeks, they had lost both Michael and Emily, two pillars of the family, each falling to their own demons. Thomas received the news in his study, where he had been reviewing yet another report from his private investigators searching for Sarah. The police officer's words seemed to come from a great distance: accident, wheelchair, stairs. Died instantly. He sat in silence long after the officer left, staring at the growing pile of papers that documented his failed attempts to find his adoptive daughter. "She should be here," he whispered to the empty room. They both should be here. The dual absence of Sarah and Emily created a vacuum in the mansion that threatened to swallow everything else. The house itself seemed to mourn, its grand rooms echoing with memories of what was lost and what might have been. The remaining family members descended upon the mansion like vultures, their concern barely masking their eagerness to discuss inheritance and legacy. They found Thomas in the garden, standing among the roses that Sarah had so lovingly tended. "Really?" Thomas's Aunt Margaret declared, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You must see that all this tragedy began when you brought that girl into our home. First Michael, now Emily. The Anderson name is becoming synonymous with scandal." Thomas turned to face her, his expression hard. "That girl has a name. She's Sarah, she's Emily's daughter, and she's my daughter now too. If you can't accept that, there's no place for you here." The family meeting that followed was tense with unspoken accusations. Lawyers presented Emily's will, revealing her decision to leave her personal fortune to Sarah. The announcement caused an uproar among the relatives. "She wasn't in her right mind," cousin William protested. "Surely we can contest this." "Emily knew exactly what she was doing," Thomas replied quietly. "She was trying, too late perhaps, to make amends." As the family argued, Thomas retreated to Emily's room in the country house. It remained exactly as she had left it, her wheelchair still overturned at the foot of the stairs, her papers scattered across her desk. Among them, he found her letters to Sarah, each one a confession, a plea for forgiveness, a mother's belated expression of love. Reading them, Thomas finally understood the depth of Emily's turmoil. She had built her life on a foundation of denial and regret, and in the end it had crumbled beneath her. Her final days had been spent in a desperate attempt to reconcile with her past, though she had run out of time before she could make things right. The funeral was a subdued affair, despite the family's attempts to maintain appearances. Thomas stood at the graveside, remembering the vibrant young woman he had married, wondering when she had become so lost in her own fears and pretenses. As the other mourners departed, he remained, placing a single rose on her grave, one from the garden where their story with Sarah had begun. "I'll find her, Emily," he promised. "I'll bring her home, and I'll tell her you finally found your way back to being her mother, even if it was too late." The mansion felt different after Emily's death, as if her passing had shifted something fundamental in its foundation. The staff moved through their duties with a quiet solemnity, many of them genuinely mourning the woman they had served for years. In Sarah's empty room, Thomas found one of Emily's letters that had been slipped under the door, perhaps her final attempt to reach out to her daughter. He added it to the growing collection of things he would share with Sarah when, not if, he insisted to himself he found her. That night, alone in his study, Thomas raised a glass to the two portraits on his wall: his mother, who had taught him the value of compassion, and Sarah, whose brief presence had reminded him what family truly meant. Between them, he placed a photo of Emily, not the polished socialite she had become, but a younger version, smiling genuinely at something beyond the camera's lens. "We're all broken in our own ways," he mused to the silent photographs. "The tragedy isn't in the breaking, it's in not allowing ourselves to be healed." Outside, autumn was turning to winter, the roses in the garden withering with the first frosts. But even in their dying, they promised renewal, much like the hope Thomas held that somewhere Sarah would learn of her mother's final acts of contrition and find her way back to the only family she had left. In the wake of Emily's death, the Anderson mansion became a hothouse of speculation and blame. Family members, staff, and even local society whispered about the string of tragedies that had befallen the once prestigious family. All fingers pointed to the absent Sarah, though few dared to voice their accusations in Thomas's presence. "It's like she brought a curse with her," whispered the elderly cook to the housemaids as they prepared another somber dinner. "First Mr. Michael, now Mrs. Emily. That girl came from the streets and brought death with her." The rumors spread through the city's elite circles, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some claimed Sarah was a con artist who had orchestrated everything. Others suggested she had manipulated Thomas's kindness to destroy the family from within. The truth that she was simply a lost child seeking belonging was too mundane for those who thrived on scandal. Thomas found himself increasingly isolated, his defense of Sarah creating a rift between him and the remaining family members. At Emily's wake, he overheard his cousin Charlotte speaking in harsh whispers. First she causes Michael's death, then drives Emily to her grave. How many more Andersons need to die before Thomas sees the truth? The accusation cut deep, not because Thomas believed it, but because he knew Sarah would. Her tendency to shoulder blame that wasn't hers had driven her away, and now these cruel whispers would make it even harder to bring her home. Each day brought new reports from the private investigators Thomas had hired, each one leading nowhere. Sarah had learned invisibility too well during her years on the streets. Every potential sighting, every possible lead, dissolved into disappointment. The garden, once Sarah's sanctuary, fell into neglect. The roses she had tended with such care began to wither, as if they too mourned her absence. Thomas often found himself standing among them, remembering how she had looked that first night, small and vulnerable, yet carrying an inner strength that had touched his heart. "You should stop looking," his Aunt Margaret advised during one of her unwelcome visits. "That girl has brought nothing but tragedy to this family. Let her go back to where she came from." Thomas's response was quiet but firm. "Sarah belongs here. She's my daughter now, whether you accept it or not, and I will find her." But as weeks turned to months, even the most loyal servants began to whisper that perhaps it was better if Sarah remained lost. They had grown fond of her during her brief stay, but superstition ran deep, and 2 deaths were hard to ignore. The discovery of Emily's letters only intensified the controversy. When news leaked that she had left her personal fortune to Sarah, the family's opposition grew even more vocal. Legal challenges were filed, claims of mental instability were raised, all attempting to prevent that street girl from inheriting what they saw as rightfully theirs. Thomas fought each challenge, his determination to protect Sarah's inheritance matching his resolve to find her. "She deserves this," he told his lawyers. "Not just the money, but the acknowledgement that she was his Emily's daughter." At night, alone in his study, Thomas would read Emily's letters again, searching for clues to where Sarah might have gone. Each word of regret, each expression of belated maternal love seemed to mock their failure to keep her safe, to make her feel wanted. The mansion's halls echoed with absence: Michael's confident stride, Emily's wheelchair, Sarah's gentle presence. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Thomas thought he could hear them all: Michael's laugh, Emily's sighs, Sarah's soft footsteps. But daylight always brought reality back, harsh and empty. One evening, as Thomas sat in the garden watching the sunset, his housekeeper approached with tears in her eyes. "I saw her," the woman confessed, "and the night she left. I could have stopped her, should have woken you, but I thought perhaps she was right, that her leaving might protect the family. I'm so sorry, sir." Thomas took the woman's hand, seeing his own guilt reflected in her eyes. "We all failed her," he said quietly. "We let her believe she was responsible for things beyond her control. But we'll make it right. Somehow we'll make it right." The roses would bloom again, he told himself. Sarah would return home, Emily's final messages of love would reach her, and the Anderson family would heal. He had to believe this, even as autumn deepened into winter and the garden lay dormant under frost. Until then, he would continue his search, defending Sarah's name against those who would blame her for the family's tragedies. She had taught him that true family wasn't about blood or status, but about choice: the choice to love, to protect, to believe in someone when the whole world seemed set against them. On a winter evening 6 months after her disappearance, Sarah Miller stood at the Anderson mansion's gate, her father's sketchbook clutched to her chest along with a weathered leather portfolio. The roses she had once tended lay dormant under frost, but the lights in Thomas's study still burned bright. a beacon calling her home. During her absence, Sarah hadn't been merely hiding, she had been searching. Living on the streets again, she used skills learned from years of survival to track down the truth about Michael's plot. Each lead, each discovered document, had brought her closer to understanding the full scope of his scheme. The portfolio she carried contained evidence she had meticulously gathered copies of Michael's correspondence with the poison supplier, bank statements showing massive withdrawals, and most damning of all, security camera footage she had obtained from a sympathetic mansion staff member showing Michael practicing the poisoning. But it was what she had found in her father's sketchbook that had finally given her the courage to return. Hidden between pages of drawings, James Miller had kept letters from Emily, desperate messages sent in the weeks after she left, revealing a young woman torn between love and ambition. The letters stopped abruptly around the time Emily had married Thomas. Sarah took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button. The housekeeper's voice, when it came, was thick with emotion. "Miss Sarah, is it really you?" Moments later, Thomas burst through the front door, not waiting for staff to open it. He looked older, more worn, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Sarah," he breathed, as if saying her name might make her disappear again. "I'm sorry," she began, but Thomas was already wrapping her in a fierce embrace, his tears warm against her hair. "Don't you dare apologize," he whispered. "Just don't leave again. I can't lose another daughter." The word daughter made Sarah's heart clench. "There's something you need to see," she said, pulling back slightly. "All of you need to see." In Thomas's study, Sarah laid out her evidence methodically. The security footage played on his laptop, showing Michael's late-night preparations. Bank records revealed his desperate financial situation. Letters between Michael and various conspirators painted a picture of long-planned malice. "He was planning it for weeks," Sarah explained, her voice steady. The adoption announcement just forced his timeline. He couldn't bear the thought of sharing the family fortune. Thomas watched the evidence unfold with growing horror and pride, horror at his brother's calculated malice, pride in Sarah's determination to uncover the truth. "But there's more," Sarah said softly, opening her father's sketchbook to reveal Emily's hidden letters. "I found these while I was away, Mom. She tried to come back once, right after she left, but something stopped her." Thomas read the letters with trembling hands. Emily's young voice leapt from the pages, full of confusion and regret. "My dearest James, I made a terrible mistake. Every day without Sarah feels like dying. But I'm afraid of poverty, afraid of judgment, afraid I'm not strong enough to be the mother she deserves." She was so young, Sarah said quietly, barely more than a child herself. "I spent so long being angry at her, but reading these, I understand her better now. She was scared, just like I was scared when I ran away." Thomas looked at the young woman before him, no longer the frightened girl he had found in his garden, but someone who had faced her fears and emerged stronger. "You came back," he said. "That's what matters." "I came back because I finally understood something," Sarah replied, touching the sketches her father had made of Emily. "Running away doesn't protect the people we love. It just creates new wounds." As if to emphasize her point, she opened the portfolio again, revealing one last document, Emily's final letter, found among her mother's papers after her death. "The housekeeper sent this to me," Sarah explained. "It's what gave me the courage to return." Together, they read Emily's last words, her confession, her regret, her too late expression of love. Thomas watched as Sarah's composure finally broke, tears falling onto the paper that held her mother's final attempt at redemption. "She loved you," Thomas said gently. "In the end, she found the courage to admit it, and now you found the courage to come home." Sarah looked around the study at her father's drawings, at Emily's letters, at the evidence that would finally clear her name. "Home," she repeated softly. "I never thought I'd have one of those again." Thomas pulled her close, feeling the weight of the past 6 months finally begin to lift. You've always had a home here, Sarah, always will. Now, let's share this evidence with the family. It's time everyone knew the truth. Among the documents Sarah had gathered during her absence was a discovery that changed everything. A series of private investigator reports commissioned by Emily over the years, each one attempting to locate her abandoned daughter. The reports, spanning nearly 2 decades, revealed a mother's secret quest to find the child she had left behind. Thomas sat in Emily's old study, reading through the files Sarah had uncovered. Each report told a piece of the story: Emily's first attempt to find them just months after leaving, her desperate search when she learned of James's illness, her renewed efforts after Sarah appeared in their garden. She hired investigators almost every year, Sarah said softly, touching one of the older reports. Even when she was pushing me away, she was trying to find me. I don't understand. The most recent report, dated just weeks before Emily's death, contained a heartbreaking revelation. She had finally located Sarah just before her appearance in their garden, but fear and shame had prevented her from reaching out. When Sarah had appeared in their garden, it wasn't coincidence Emily had known she was living nearby. Look at this, Thomas pointed to a note in Emily's handwriting. She's so like her father. Same gentle spirit, same artistic soul. I don't deserve to be her mother now. I lost that right when I chose wealth over love. The investigation files contained photographs of Sarah and James in their final apartment, Sarah sketching in public parks, Sarah sleeping in shelters. Emily had collected these glimpses of her daughter's life like precious gems, hidden away in her private shame. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling out a thick envelope. Inside were dozens of uncashed checks, each made out to James Miller, dating back to his cancer diagnosis. She tried to help Dad anonymously, but he was too proud to accept money without knowing where it came from. He returned every check. Thomas remembered Emily's bitter comments about James's pride, seeing them now in a new light. She couldn't bring herself to face him directly, but she tried to save him from afar, just like she watched over you from a distance. The most poignant discovery was a series of birthday cards Emily had written but never sent, one for each year she had missed. Each card contained not just wishes, but detailed observations about Sarah's life gleaned from the investigator reports: her first art show in a shelter program, her academic achievements despite homelessness, her kindness to other street children. She saw everything Sarah whispered, reading through the cards. All those years I thought she didn't care. She was watching, keeping track of every moment she missed. In Emily's final diary entry, written the night before her fatal fall, she had penned, "I've spent my life hiding behind walls of wealth and status, too afraid to reach out to my own daughter. Now Sarah has shown more courage in facing the truth than I ever did. She is everything I could have been if I'd chosen love over fear." The staff contributed their own revelations. The head housekeeper admitted that Emily would often wheel herself to Sarah's room late at night, sitting outside the door, sometimes talking softly to the daughter she couldn't bring herself to face in daylight. "She would ask me about you," the housekeeper told Sarah. "Every detail of your day, what you liked to eat, how you were settling in." She acted cold, but she absorbed every piece of information like a woman dying of thirst. A gardener revealed that the roses Sarah had tended were the same variety Emily had grown in her youth. Before choosing a life of privilege, she had maintained that small connection to her past even while rejecting everything else from that time. Thomas watched Sarah process these revelations, seeing her struggle to reconcile the mother who had rejected her with the woman who had spent years desperately trying to know her from afar. "Fear can make us do terrible things," he said gently. "Your mother let her fear of poverty, of judgment, of her own unworthiness, keep her from the one thing she wanted most, you." Sarah held one of the birthday cards, tracing her mother's elegant handwriting. She wrote in one report that she used to sing me to sleep with Moon River. I always remembered that song but couldn't place where I knew it from. All this time I've been carrying pieces of her with me without even knowing it. The evidence of Emily's secret vigil over her daughter's life transformed her from a cold, rejecting figure into something more complex, a woman trapped by her own choices, desperately trying to bridge a gap she herself had created. Her final act of leaving everything to Sarah seemed less like sudden remorse and more like the culmination of years of silent love and regret. Thomas gathered the remaining Anderson family members in the grand living room, where Sarah's evidence lay spread across the antique mahogany table. The security footage of Michael's poisoning attempt played silently on a laptop, while Emily's private investigator reports and years of secret correspondence formed a paper trail of truth that could no longer be denied. "Before you speak," Thomas addressed the assembled relatives. "Before you continue your accusations against Sarah, you need to see what we've discovered," he gestured to Sarah, who stood tall beside him, no longer the frightened girl they had judged so harshly. One by one, the family members examined the evidence. They watched Michael practicing his deadly plan, read his desperate communications about maintaining control of the family fortune, and saw the proof of his calculated malice. Aunt Margaret's face grew pale as she realized how wrong they had been about Sarah's role in his death. "But there's more," Sarah said quietly, opening her father's sketchbook. "This isn't just about clearing my name. It's about understanding who Emily really was." She shared the hidden letters, the birthday cards, the years of private investigation reports that revealed Emily's secret vigil over her daughter's life. Cousin William, who had been most vocal in opposing Sarah's inheritance, sat heavily in an armchair. "All this time," he murmured, "we thought Emily was rejecting you, but she was watching over you, trying to protect you in her own broken way." The housekeeper stepped forward, adding her own testimony about Emily's late-night vigils outside Sarah's door. The gardener spoke of Emily's careful preservation of the roses that connected her to her past. Each revelation painted a picture of a woman far more complex than the cold socialite they had known. "We judged you," Charlotte said to Sarah, tears in her eyes. "We blamed you for bringing tragedy to this family, but you were just a child seeking belonging, while we were the ones clinging to prejudices and false assumptions." Sarah spread out the uncashed checks Emily had tried to send to James. "She couldn't face us directly, but she tried to help. My father was too proud to accept anonymous aid, and she was too afraid to reveal herself. They were both trapped by pride and fear, and I was caught in the middle." The family's attitude shifted perceptibly as they processed these revelations. The servants who had whispered about curses now spoke of Sarah's kindness during her time in the mansion. Those who had opposed her inheritance fell silent, confronted with evidence of Emily's long-standing desire to make amends. Michael's actions were his own, Thomas declared, born of greed and desperation. Emily's death was a tragic accident, but one precipitated by her own internal struggles, not by Sarah's presence. It's time we stopped looking for someone to blame and started healing as a family. Aunt Margaret, who had been among Sarah's harshest critics, approached her slowly. "Your mother," she said softly, "was my dearest friend. I never understood her sadness until now. Can you forgive us for failing to see the truth?" Sarah looked around the room at the faces that had once held only judgment, now softened with understanding and regret. "There's been enough blame," she replied. "Enough running away from truth. Maybe it's time we all tried something different, accepting each other, flaws and all." Thomas watched proudly as his daughter, for that's truly what she was now, showed more grace and maturity than those who had condemned her. The Anderson family began to shift that day, moving from rigid judgment to tentative acceptance, from blind prejudice to careful understanding. The evidence Sarah had gathered did more than clear her name. It revealed the complex humanity of both Michael and Emily, showing how fear, pride, and desperation could twist even the strongest family bonds. But it also showed the possibility of redemption, of healing old wounds through truth and forgiveness. As the family members dispersed, each carrying their own share of regret and revelation, Thomas and Sarah stood in the garden where their story had begun. The roses would bloom again in spring, and with them perhaps a new chapter in the Anderson family legacy, one built on truth, acceptance, and the kind of love that transcends blood ties and social status. The transformation of the Anderson mansion from a place of secrets and judgment to one of healing and acceptance didn't happen overnight. It began with small gestures: Aunt Margaret helping Sarah organize Emily's personal belongings, Cousin William asking to see James's artwork, Charlotte joining Sarah in tending the winter garden. The family gathered one evening in the library, where Thomas had arranged a memorial of sorts. On one wall hung James Miller's finest sketches, carefully framed portraits of a younger Emily, of baby Sarah, of the life they had briefly shared. Beside them were photographs from Emily's later years, including surveillance photos from her private investigators, showing her hidden devotion to the daughter she couldn't face. "It's time," Thomas announced, "to properly honor all members of this family, those we've lost and those we've found." He unveiled a new family portrait, one that included a painting of James Miller alongside the Anderson ancestors. Sarah's father was an artist who saw beauty in truth. Let's honor his legacy by embracing honesty in our own lives. Sarah stood before her father's sketches, addressing the gathered family with quiet strength. "For years I thought I had to choose between honoring my father's memory and accepting my place here. But Dad always said art reveals the connections we try to hide. Looking at his drawings now, I see he never stopped believing in the possibility of healing, even after Mom left." The evidence Sarah had gathered about Michael's plot and Emily's secret vigil had done more than clear her name. It had forced the family to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. Aunt Margaret, once Sarah's fiercest critic, now became her strongest advocate among the extended family. Emily tried to live two lives, Margaret reflected, helping Sarah sort through her mother's belongings, one of privilege and perfection, and one of secret longing for the daughter she left behind. In the end, the weight of that division destroyed her. The staff, who had once whispered about curses, now spoke of blessings. They watched as Sarah brought life back to the mansion's cold elegance, much as she had revived the winter garden. Her father's artistic spirit merged with the Anderson dignity, creating something new and vital. Thomas observed these changes with quiet joy, seeing his adopted daughter finally claim her place in both worlds. She maintained her compassion for the less fortunate while learning to navigate society's expectations, proving that one needn't choose between empathy and success. The legal challenges to Sarah's inheritance quietly disappeared as the evidence of Emily's long-standing intention to provide for her daughter became clear. The Anderson lawyers now worked to establish a foundation in James Miller's name, providing art education and healthcare for underprivileged children. "Your father's death from untreated cancer will not be in vain," Thomas told Sarah as they reviewed the foundation's plans. "Every child we help through this foundation honors his memory and your mother's final wish to make amends." The roses in the garden began to show signs of new growth, tiny buds promising spring's renewal. Sarah spent hours there, sketching like her father had taught her, finding healing in the act of creating beauty from pain. Sometimes, family members would join her, eager to learn about the artistic perspective she had inherited from James. One evening, as Sarah added the final touches to a portrait of Emily, not the polished socialite, but the young mother from her father's sketches, Charlotte asked the question they had all wondered: "How did you find the strength to forgive us?" Sarah considered the question carefully, looking at her dual inheritance, James's sketchbook and Emily's letters, the artist's soul and the socialite's legacy. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past," she replied. "It's about choosing to build a better future. Dad taught me that through his art, and Mum taught me through her regret. Even Michael, in his tragic way, showed us what happens when we let fear and pride poison our hearts." Thomas, watching from the doorway, saw in Sarah the best of both her parents, James's gentle wisdom and Emily's determined spirit, combined with a strength uniquely her own. The Anderson family was healing, not by burying its past, but by finally having the courage to face it honestly. The mansion's halls, once filled with whispers of scandal and judgment, now echoed with more genuine sounds: laughter, honest conversations, the scratch of Sarah's charcoal on paper as she captured moments of family connection that would have once seemed impossible. On a bright spring morning, 1 year after Sarah's return, the Anderson Mansion's ballroom was transformed for the launch of the Hope Foundation. Under the crystal chandeliers, artwork from James Miller hung alongside photographs of Emily's secret vigilance over her daughter, telling a story of love lost and found across generations. Thomas stood at the podium, Sarah by his side, addressing the gathered crowd of society's elite and former street children alike. The Hope Foundation, he announced, is built on the belief that every child deserves not just survival but the chance to thrive. We are here to bridge the gaps that fear and pride create between people. The Foundation's mission was threefold: providing art education to underprivileged children, ensuring healthcare access to prevent tragedies like James Miller's death, and supporting homeless youth transitioning to stable lives. Each aspect reflected a piece of Sarah's story and her parents' legacy. Sarah had insisted that the Foundation's first facility be located in the neighborhood where she and her father had lived. The James Miller Art Center offered free classes, supplies, and mentoring to children who, like Sarah once had, carried sketchbooks as their most precious possessions. "Art saved me," Sarah told the audience, her voice strong with conviction. "When I had nothing else, I had my father's teachings about finding beauty in truth. Every child deserves that kind of lifeline." The Emily Anderson Medical Fund, established with the fortune she had left to Sarah, ensured that no parent would have to choose between treatment and leaving their children destitute. The irony of Emily's money now preventing the very situation she had fled was not lost on anyone. Former street children, now dressed in clean clothes and carrying portfolios of their artwork, shared their stories of how the Foundation had changed their lives. Many had been helped directly by Sarah, who spent hours at the center teaching art classes and sharing her experiences. "Miss Sarah showed us that where you come from doesn't define where you're going," one young girl declared, proudly displaying her first completed painting. "She taught us that every story deserves to be told, even the painful ones." The Foundation's headquarters, housed in a renovated wing of the Anderson Mansion, symbolized the family's transformation. Rooms that had once hosted society's most exclusive gatherings now welcomed children from all walks of life, their artwork brightening centuries-old walls. Thomas watched Sarah move through the crowd, equally comfortable discussing art techniques with street children and fundraising strategies with wealthy donors. She had found her calling in creating bridges between the world she inhabited, using her unique perspective to foster understanding. The Anderson family, once scandalized by Sarah's presence, now worked alongside her in various Foundation projects. Aunt Margaret supervised the scholarship program, while Charlotte organized art exhibitions featuring work from the center's students. "Emily would be proud," Margaret told Sarah as they watched a group of children tour the gallery of James's artwork. "She spent years watching you from afar, and now you're doing what she never could, reaching across the divide to help others." The Foundation's success story spread through the city's social circles, changing narratives about privilege and responsibility. Families who had once whispered about the Anderson scandal now competed to support the Foundation's initiatives, inspired by Sarah's example of grace and forgiveness. At the end of the launch event, Thomas unveiled the Foundation's logo, a rose blooming through concrete, designed by Sarah herself. "Like the rose in our garden," he explained, "beauty and hope can flourish in the most unlikely places when given the chance." Sarah stood in the garden later that evening, sketching the sunset, while children from the art center practiced their techniques around her. The roses were blooming again, their fragrance mixing with the sound of young laughter, a combination that would have once seemed impossible in the formal Anderson garden. Looking at the mansion that had changed from a symbol of exclusion to one of hope, Sarah reflected on her journey. Her father's artistic spirit and her mother's final act of love had combined to create something powerful, a legacy of healing that would touch generations to come. The Hope Foundation became more than just a charitable organization. It was a testament to the possibility of transformation, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when exposed to the light of truth and compassion. In its success, both the Miller and Anderson legacies found their truest expression. 5 years after the Hope Foundation's establishment, the Anderson Mansion hosted a special exhibition. The Grand Ballroom displayed a retrospective of James Miller's artwork alongside photographs documenting the Foundation's impact, and at its center stood Sarah's masterpiece, a triptych portraying her journey. The first panel showed her father teaching her to draw, his gentle hands guiding hers across paper, while Emily watched from a distance a scene reconstructed from both memory and her mother's secret photographs. The second captured her time on the streets, sleeping in the Anderson garden among the roses that would change her life. The final panel depicted the present, the Hope Foundation's children painting alongside society's elite, barriers broken down through art and understanding. Art reveals the truth we try to hide, Sarah explained to the gathered crowd, echoing her father's words. But it also shows us the way forward. Every child who comes through our doors carries a story waiting to be told, just as I did. Thomas stood beside his daughter, pride evident in his eyes. The past 5 years had transformed not just the foundation, but the entire Anderson legacy. What had once been a family defined by wealth and status was now known for its commitment to breaking down social barriers and fostering understanding between different worlds. The true measure of wealth, Thomas addressed the audience, isn't in what we keep for ourselves, but in what we give to others. Sarah taught us that lesson by simply being who she is, her father's daughter and her mother's redemption. The Foundation's success stories filled the room. Former street children now attended college on Emily Anderson scholarships. Families once torn apart by poverty and illness found healing through the medical fund. Young artists discovered their voices in programs that combined James's artistic vision with Emily's social connections. Sarah's own story had become a symbol of possibility. She had maintained her father's gentle spirit while learning to navigate her mother's world, proving that one didn't have to choose between authenticity and acceptance. Her dual heritage, the artist's soul, and the socialite's legacy had combined to create something entirely new. The Anderson family, once divided by prejudice and pride, now worked together in service of a greater purpose. Aunt Margaret, who had once led the opposition to Sarah's presence, now fiercely defended the Foundation's mission to help children regardless of their background. "We were wrong," Margaret admitted publicly, to think that protecting our family meant keeping others out. True protection comes from opening our hearts and sharing our blessings. As twilight fell, Sarah stood in the garden where her story had begun. The roses bloomed more abundantly than ever, tended now by children learning about growth and beauty. Thomas joined her, both of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "Dad used to say that every sketch tells 2 stories," Sarah mused, the one on the surface and the one in the heart. "I think our family finally learned to see both." "Your father was a wise man," Thomas replied, "and your mother in the end found her way back to love, even if it was too late. Their story through you has helped heal so many others." The exhibition concluded with the unveiling of a new wing of the mansion, dedicated to permanent housing for children transitioning from homelessness. Above its entrance hung a portrait of Emily and James in their youth, painted by Sarah from her father's sketches, a reminder that love transcends social boundaries. "This is their legacy," Sarah told the gathering. "Not the money or the status, but the understanding that every person deserves the chance to tell their story, to belong somewhere, to create beauty from pain." The Hope Foundation had become more than a charity. It was a testament to the possibility of transformation. Through art, through compassion, through the courage to face hard truths, it proved that the deepest wounds could heal and the strongest barriers could fall. As night fell and the last guests departed, Sarah added the final touch to her triptych, a small rose blooming in the corner of each panel, symbolizing hope's persistence through all seasons of life. The Anderson Mansion, once a fortress of privilege, had become a beacon of possibility, proving that true legacy lies not in what we inherit, but in what we choose to create from it. Every story matters, Sarah wrote in the Foundation's mission statement. Every child deserves to be seen, every voice deserves to be heard, and every heart deserves the chance to heal. This is what art teaches us, what love shows us, and what truth demands of us. And in the garden where it all began, the roses continued to bloom, testament to the power of love to transform lives, one story at a time. If this story of love, redemption, and the power of forgiveness has touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you most about Sarah's journey? Share your reflections in the comments below. Support our team by subscribing to see more compelling stories that explore the depths of human emotion. Help us spread these messages of hope by sharing this video with friends and family. Your likes and engagement inspire us to continue creating meaningful content that bridges hearts and minds. Together, let's build a community that celebrates the transformative power of love and understanding.